Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Chatham Select Board meeting of December 20th, 2022. Let the record show the meeting started promptly at 5:31. Pursuant to Governor Baker's July 16th, 2022 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, until March 31st, 2023, this meeting of the Chatham Select Board is being conducted via in-person and remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410, conference ID 203-386-491#, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. While this is a live broadcast and simulcast on Channel 18, despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. And I thank you very much. First item of business, a roll call, please. Mr. Metters.
Present.
Mr. Shell.
Present.
Ms. Davis.
Present.
And Mr. Nicastro.
Present.
And Chair is present as well. First order of business, we will entertain a motion on the minutes of December 13th.
Second.
Any edits, suggestions, comments? Okay, we'll go for a vote. Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Nicastro.
Aye.
The chair says aye. The next item on our agenda is public announcements. I have one. I'm saddened to report the passing of Ira Selden. Ira was a stalwart in the community. He served on the Finance Committee from 1999 to 2007. He served on the Conservation Commission from 2007 to 2008. And he served remarkably well on the Park and Rec Commission from 2009 to 2021, a long term. So we saddened with his passing. Moment of silence. Thank you. Our thoughts go out to the family. Any other public announcements? Any public announcements online? Okay, I see none. Agenda item requests from the Select Board. Any agenda item requests this evening? No. Any agenda item requests online? I see none. Okay, on to any public comments on our business agenda this evening. We have considering requests for special one-day alcohol permits for Creative Arts Center. Actually, I think there's 2 or 3 of them. We have a Select Board Committee review follow-up, expanding the Energy and Climate Action Committee membership. We have an update on the new Fisherman's Storage Area project update from Dr. Bob Duncanson. We have a Stepping Stones property housing test fit. We're going to get to look at some slides and some what-ifs for Stepping Stones for housing. And then we are going to convene the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board of Trustees meeting. And then we will also go into an executive session with respect to affordable and attainable housing. So any public comments on our business agenda this evening here at the Select Board? Okay. Hearing and seeing none, we'll go on to our first order of business on our business agenda. To consider a request for a special one-day alcohol permit, Creative Arts Center, 154 Crowell Road, January 8th from 4 to 5:30, February 5th from 4 to 5:30, and March 5th from 4 to 5:30. And Shauna, any comments on that one?
These are annual requests. First 3 of them, I'm sure 10 for artist receptions at the Creative Arts Center.
Did we get a note about a change of time on one of them, Shauna?
The January 8th is from 4 to 5:30.
Okay. Mr.
Yes, Ms. Davis.
I move to grant a special one-day liquor permit for all alcohol beverages to Angela Malt on behalf of the Creative Arts Center for Sunday, January 8th, 2023, from 4 to 5:30, Sunday, February 5th, 2023, from 4 to 5:30, and Sunday, March 5th, 2023, from 4 to 5:30 at 154 Crowell Road, Chatham.
A second.
Thank you very much. Comments? Suggestions? Okay, Mr. Nicastro.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Mr. Metters.
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. That vote is unanimous. Our next item on our business agenda is the consideration of expanding the Energy and Climate Action Committee membership. We were requested to do so when they reported out month or so ago in in our meeting. So comments on the recommendation or their request to expand the membership. Mr. Nacastro.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is pretty straightforward, so I'm very supportive of it, and I'm prepared to offer the motion. I move
Please.
to increase the membership of the Energy and Climate Action Committee to 9 members, with one new term to June 30th, 2024, and the other to June 30th, 2025.
Second.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shell. Any comments? I'm certainly very supportive. It's something we're looking for. They want to round out the expertise on this great committee, so.
Yeah, if I may,
Yes.
as their liaison, they've expanded their jurisdiction. They're doing a lot of work, and I think it's very appropriate.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, well, we'll take a vote. Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
And the chair also says aye. Okay. Okay, an update on the new Fisherman's Storage Area project. Dr. Bob Duncanson is here, our Director of Natural Resources, to give us an update on the Fisherman's Storage Area.
Evening, members of the board. So, as you will recall, the former Fisherman's Storage Area on the east side of the airport was ordered closed by the FAA, and we've been working over the last year to accommodate that. 4 fishermen have relocated to the water pollution control plant in what we're calling the temporary fisherman's storage area. They completed that earlier back in September and the beginning of October. DPW subsequently hired a contractor who came in and basically cleaned up the old fisherman's storage area. I've been down there several times. There's some small debris and all left, and the Airport Commission is currently working with a contractor to kind of remove any remaining small debris, and by that I mean, broken pieces and things like that, nothing major, as well as to regrade the site and whatnot. We did find 2 instances of potential hazardous materials, 2 5-gallon jugs of what appeared to be used lube oil. They were removed by DPW and are being held until the next household hazardous waste collection day next spring. And then just last week, Huntley Harrison, the chairman of the Airport Commission, pointed out to me some old shingle material that we suspect may be old transite shingling that may contain asbestos. So I've gotten samples and FedEx them off to a firm today to have those tested. It's not a huge amount. It was kind of buried under a bunch of pile leaves. You wouldn't have seen it until they kind of moved some other material out of the way. But hopefully, we'll get the results back hopefully by the end of this week. I've already got some contacts for cleanup firms, and if we have to, we'll get that properly disposed of. Other than that, it will just be removed with the rest of the debris that's kind of being thrown in dumpsters and taken to the transfer station, provided it doesn't have asbestos in it. So the cleanup of the old site's pretty well complete. We were before this board back in September to give you an update, and at that time, we were still waiting for DEP sign off on a permit to relocate potentially to the new site. We never actually got a permit, but under DEP regs, when they don't respond within 30 days, it's presumptive approval. So we went ahead and put the new site out to bid. And we received 4 bids, which were included in your packet. And we received a recommendation from the engineer to award that bid to J.W. Dubus and Sons for the work. So we received their bid. They were the lowest bidder at $134,500. You may recall that last spring, town meeting appropriated $200,000 for relocating the fisherman's storage area. We've signed a contract with the engineers for the engineering and permitting for roughly $42,000. So we had about $158,000 left in that $200,000. So we have sufficient funds to cover the relocation. I ran a couple of quick scenarios that are in your packet. If the town were to look at recouping the costs of the fisherman's storage area, what the potential fee might be on an annual basis, keeping in mind that in past years, the fee for use of the fisherman's storage area has been $600 a year. And you can see the fees to use the current or the proposed site under different time horizons of trying to recoup the cost or not, would be significantly more than $600. So I posed a number of questions in the memo to the board, probably the most basic of which is, do you want to go ahead with the relocated area or not? It's been permitted. We have sufficient funds for the construction of that area. So that's kind of the one big first question. Do you want to go ahead with doing that or not? Keeping in mind that we currently, right now, only have 3 fishermen that have relocated to the temporary storage area. They are all current docking permit holders at the fish pier, which is a requirement to use the previous fisherman's storage area. And then second question might be, is there an interest in recouping that cost for the new area? And if so, under what time horizon? Are we looking at recouping the entire cost that was appropriated by town meeting or some portion thereof, which obviously would factor into what potential fee may be? We will have to go through a procurement process to set that fee based on fair market conditions, but at least in the memo, I've given you some idea of what we're looking at in terms of recouping town cost. And then a couple other things. Currently, or the previous fisherman's storage area required somebody to hold a docking permit at the fish pier to be eligible for use of the fisherman's storage area. And there's also been some discussion in the past about limiting access to the fisherman's storage area to Chatham residents only, keeping in mind that there are individuals that hold docking permits at the fish pier that are not Chatham residents. So whether or not you want to provide any guidance for that. And then in the past, it's always been done on an annual basis. So each year, someone would have to get a new permit. And so the question is, do we continue that on an annual basis of having to get a separate permit, or in this case, a license? We've switched from permits over to licenses to use the temporary facility based on the advice of town council, and I anticipate that we would also look at licenses for the newly relocated area. And would those be for 1 year or potentially longer, to maybe make it more attractive to a fisherman? So with that, I can screen share to show you the new site if anybody just needs a refresher on where that is going to be.
That'd be great, Bob, thanks.
Okay. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so this is the schematic of the new site. You've got Middle Road over on the left-hand side there. The wastewater treatment plant is kind of in the lower right, and the capped landfill is like immediately behind this area, and the transfer station's a little bit off the top of the page, if you will. So it'd be located off Middle Road. We would create or construct a gravel driveway coming in off Middle Road that would be gated. As we've laid it out here, we have 3 5,000 square foot plots separated by what we call bin blocks. Those are those big concrete blocks. And basically, they make them out of leftover concrete at the end of each day at concrete plants. That way, they're movable. So if somebody said, well, I don't need 5,000 square feet, somebody could ask for a smaller area. We'd be able to move those blocks around to potentially accommodate that. So right now, it's set up for 3 plots. Because originally we queried everybody that had existing permits and asked them if they were interested in a relocated area, and we really only received 3 replies, mainly from the lobstermen that have large numbers of traps. Subsequent to that, we did get 1 other fisherman who had some gear stored at there, so we now have 4 people using the temporary area. I think at least 2 of the 4 probably don't need 5,000 square feet based on the amount of material that they have stored at the wastewater treatment plant. The 2 lobstermen, they probably could use 5,000, but maybe even less. So that's what the proposal is. The area nothing would be paved. The entire area would be covered in hardening or gravel for the access road. It would be surrounded by a swale on one side. The area in there is fairly flat. It will require a little bit of earth moving, but not much. So we'd go in, we'd cut down the trees, grade it out, put down the surface so they could drive on it. We've set it up so we maintain at least a 50-foot buffer for screening off Middle Road. And we would take advantage of the existing fence around the wastewater treatment facility and the landfill and basically tie into that fence and then carry the chain link fence around the north and west sides of this new area. And as I said, we would have a gate that could be locked to prevent some of the issues that we encountered with the old location where it was ungated. And people could go in and do illegal dumping. So the thought is that this would be a much more controlled site. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bob. Mr. Metters?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple comments. First, very happy to have the low bidder come in at a significant gap between the high and low. I mean, there's a big gap between the numbers. So familiar with the work, so no issue with that. Moving forward on a new site, I have been and I am still supportive of that process. Recouping some of the expense associated with this, I don't think that is a bad idea. I think it'll be equitable to the taxpayers and in the process, so I don't have a problem with that. I'm a little looking for some clarification on a rental fee, and I have the question of, do we have an idea, a couple of things. One, do we have an idea of what the market might be, in general? Have we had any discussions prior to, moving into the temporary site about what possible fees tenants would be expecting in the new site, knowing that there'd be a market rate? The $600 fee they've been paying for years is a very, very fair rate. I mean, it's beyond fair. But so was there any feeling of what market rate would be expected so we can get a feel that, yes, those who are interested are willing to pay this amount to have this amenity associated for or allowed to them? So a little bit of clarification on that. Since we only have a handful of sites that we're looking at doing, Chatham resident priority, don't have an issue with that. I think that's very reasonable for us. And as far as a time period on the lease, I would actually prefer to go a little bit longer, 2-3 years. I don't want to go too long, but on an annual basis, I think those who are going to commit to this they want it. So from just a paperwork perspective and processing, make it a little bit longer, just to be more efficient with our staff time. So those are my initial thoughts, to be honest with you. But I'm supportive of moving forward on this.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Ms. Davis?
Thank you, Jeff. Dr. Bob, so I look at, you have 3 6,200 square feet spaces, but potentially could be 5. So, and that would be at $4.56 per square foot. Is that what you have in there? As a potential cost, if the recommendation would be like somewhere around $1,400.
Yeah, it depends on whether or not we try to look at recouping the cost over a 10 or 20-year period.
Right. The recommendation being that it was around $1,400. If would that be?
I didn't make any recommendation. I was kind of leaving that for the board's discussion.
I get, okay,
Yeah.
so I just step back. I'm just trying to say that will the lease be based on the square footage of, rather than just a base cost, because you're looking at 3 to 5 and you're looking for people that might want little or less space. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, I would think because people may want less and more, that yes, a square footage price would be the appropriate way as opposed to a flat fee where everybody pays the same even if they only need a smaller area.
Currently, all the guys that are, or all the fishing companies that are utilizing the temporary site, are they all Chatham residents?
I think there may be one that isn't.
Okay.
I'd have to double check.
All right. Also, just as a note, one of the prerequisites or recommendation is for a Chatham resident with a fishing docking permit. I think one of the people that's up there now, he fishes out of Stage Harbor, so he doesn't have a fish. Just as a matter of fact, that there are a couple of lobster guys that are out of Stage, and there's also some horseshoe crab fishermen and even shell fishermen that might be interested in something like this if they had the need. Just as a note that just might be clarified somehow. So from my point of, my perspective, I like the idea that it would be a little longer lease, perhaps with an annual inspection or at least in person together with staff. I really think it would be best to keep it as a Chatham residence preference at this point, and because I just think it suits us better to do it that way. As far as the annual fee, I'm gonna defer to that to somebody else, because I have my daughter has a lease as a fisherman in town, so I'm gonna let everybody else talk about that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Nacastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, I just had a question on the $11,500 cleanup cost. Who's paying that, the town or the airport?
We actually paid most of it out of, there was some funds a number of years ago to put gates and camera over at the old fisherman storage area, which kind of put on hold when the FAA announced their closure. So right now, we paid for the cleanup out of that, partially out of that and partially out of another fund that DPW had.
So partially it's indirectly coming out from the airport.
There's nothing directly
Because
coming
of
out of
the-
the airport. None of it's coming directly out of the airport funding.
Who paid for the cameras and the old,
That was a capital item we'd gotten a couple of years ago.
Okay,
That
all
was a capital item, not airport.
okay. Just to add on to what, or to agree with what Corey and Shereen were saying, I like the idea of the annual fee, or the fee being based on the square footage. Not sure what the amount should be. One of the suggestions you have in there for, depending on whether you include the engineering costs, seem, in the range of what is reasonable. I'd like to recoup as much as we could within reason over a 20-year period. Both Shereen and Corey mentioned a preference for Chatham. I'm not sure, did you mean preference or requirement that you be Chatham? A requirement. I mean, I'm okay with that. I do like the idea that Shereen mentioned about having an annual inspection.
Yeah.
I agree with Corey that maybe the term should be for 3 years. That seems very reasonable to me. Certainly want to go ahead with it. And I do think that what's been laid out here, I know we spent a lot of time on this at several meetings, but given what historically has been more or less a haphazard approach to managing this storage, I think this is a much more controlled and structured way of doing things, so I think it's a positive development. Those are my thoughts, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nacastro. Mr. Shell.
Yeah, I guess I'm not exactly clear from the way you presented this, what exactly your sense of the demand in the market sense is for this. And I guess as a kind of a threshold matter, I'm wondering whether you have some minimum expression of firm interest that you've got to have in hand before you commit to spend another $135,000 to construct this. That's kind of my threshold question. So let me stop there and
Okay.
ask you that question.
And it gets back to some of the questions that Corey asked at the beginning. First, going back to Corey's question, we don't know what the market rate currently is. We didn't kind of do anything. We wanted to kind of see where the board was thinking tonight. And we did have conversations with the four leaseholders, or the four license holders that moved over to the temporary storage area. We did indicate to them that we didn't have a number at the time because we hadn't gone out to bid. We didn't have any firm numbers. We did indicate to them that in all likelihood, going forward, the fee would increase beyond what they've historically paid, the $600. In terms of firm use commitments, if you will, we do have the 4 individuals that are currently moved over to the temporary area. In addition to that, after we'd kind of gone through that process, I was approached by 2 other individuals in town expressing an interest in the fisherman's storage area. One, I think, subsequently pretty much backed out because we're not having power there, and he indicated he needed power to be able to work on some of his equipment and all and whatnot. So I would say at this point, there was at least one other person who expressed a fair amount of interest. So that would bring us up to 5. One question that I had based on the discussion, I hear loud and clear the Chatham preference, which is fine. Right now in the past, it's always been a requirement you had to have a fish pier docking permit to utilize the area, but obviously, as Shireen indicated, we now have a number of fishermen that are working out of the Stage Harbor area. So if we get rid of that requirement that you have to have a docking permit at the fish pier, that may open it up to others interested parties. But I can't give you a firm number now because we haven't, had that conversation or put that notice out, if you will. And I think, to some extent, it's really going to be driven by how much area people want. If we took one of those 6,000 areas and divided it into 2,000, square feet or 1,000 square feet, you could theoretically put a fairly large number of individuals up there if they need smaller areas. If you've only got, 3 people that all need 6,000 square feet, then you're limited to 3. But I think we're going to be somewhere probably north of that because some of these guys, from what I've seen, they moved over to the temporary storage. They don't need 6,000 square feet. But I can't give you a number yet.
Well, okay, and that helps me with the threshold question, should we build it? It sounds to me like it makes sense that we ought to go forward with that. I'm generally, I'll say either in agreement or have no objection to the comments that you've heard from my colleagues. The only comment beyond that I would make is that over time, obviously, as the demand for that flexes, whether it's up, down, or sideways, I would think that it would make more sense to have some sort of a structure of preferences that say, when it's, when everybody and his brother wants a spot, then obviously Chatham and fish pier permits, you got to have it, but if there's a little less demand for it, you expand that, open that up, and do it with the idea of maximizing utilization would be my sense.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Shireen?
I do want to clarify that right now, one of the guys up there is just strictly out of Stage Harbor, and he's a quahog dragger. So it's already precedent that it isn't just a fish pier docking permit that allows you to lease it.
And I'm fine with that. I didn't mean to imply otherwise.
Okay, any other comments? Mr. Metters, yeah, and then Mr. Nicastro.
Just
Go ahead.
probably, this is not something I really want to get in a huge discussion over, but just a thought that crossed my mind. If we ever to get so lucky to get this really ramped up and there was a tremendous amount of interest in it, would we want to think about some kind of a waiting list policy, protocol moving forward? Just, don't want to get over the top. Let's deal with it right now. But if there was a process, we file $5 fee, whatever, just to keep it on the books that we know what to do with.
Yeah, that's a good notion. Mr. Shell?
Yeah, one other question. I'm a little confused here about I thought I heard something about the procurement feature dictating how much you're going to have to charge, and then you had an open question about recovering costs. I would think that if there's a procurement requirement that dictates it, we'll get back what we get back, but that will determine what the fee is or what the rental is. Can you clarify that?
Do you want to?
Sure. So in our experience, like with the fish pier packing house leases, we've set the minimum requirement for the lease, the annual lease. But for this is a little different. It's a license that would be issued by the town, and the procurement is more so related to us charging a market rate for it, and that we have a process of who to select who gets the license. So it's twofold. It's complicated. Certainly, town council can help us. He's been put on notice that this is coming, but we have to fashion the procurement so that it is definitely a market rate, and that there's criteria for those who would be eligible for it.
Okay, so I echo a lot of the thoughts that have already been expressed. I think the square foot approach is the right approach. I think Chatham preference is great, and unless for some unknown reason, no one bids, then, we open up maybe to the market. So I think Chatham certainly gets preference. I think we have to wait for some market rates to kind of figure out what we're going to charge here, but I think, the square foot approach is certainly the right approach. I think we look to accrue our costs, and I think the longer term is smart too, with a 3-year lease. I think kind of binds folks for longer. Plan looks good. Is power nearby?
Yeah, I mean, there's power right there on Middle Road.
Right.
But there's nothing, there's no power close to the site, if you will, in terms of anything. So we'd have to tap into the pole, but we could bring it in.
So, I think you heard the consensus. I think we'll just wait for rates. Mr. Nacastro.
Just wanted to ask, we were given to understand that there's one current temporary holder is not a Chatham resident, is that right?
Yes.
Is that particular individual interested in going into the permanent facility?
I would say yes.
So if we have it as an absolute requirement that you be a Chatham person, that individual would not be eligible. I don't know what that means for us.
I mean, one thing you could consider is people that have been in the fisherman's storage area and are using the temporary one kind of get preference automatically, whether they're Chatham residents or not, but anybody who historically has not been in the fisherman's storage area would Chatham residents,
Okay.
So you could grandfather the current people in.
Yeah. I don't have any strong feeling about it. I just raised the question.
I would suggest we check with town council on it,
I would
because
too.
it hasn't been bid in 20 or 30 years. So it's
Yeah.
something we just need to make sure that we're following the law.
Yeah, I agree with Jill. Corey, comment?
No, getting a legal opinion is perfectly fine. I have no issue if it's allowable, legally allowable. Current users of the temporary site, allow some kind of preference because they're part of the transition plan. If that's allowable, I don't have a big issue with it. But I know Chatham preference is something I would prefer. So, yeah, let's see a legal opinion and then roll from there.
Yeah, Ms. Davis.
So I don't want to complicate things even more, but if you look at the fish pier regulations, I believe that non-residents have a different fee structure
They do.
accordingly. So I'm very supportive of a Chatham resident only site.
Okay, well, let's see what town council comes back with, and let's see what market rates look like, and then we'll revisit it fairly shortly. But I think you have good policy direction, Dr. Bob. Is there anything else you
Okay.
need? Anything else you need?
Nope, that's
Jill,
what we're looking
anything
for.
else you need?
We're also, we
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure we had
We take a vote.
okay to proceed.
Take a vote on the award of the bid.
Yeah, I would take a vote on the awarding of the contract.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the town award the bid for construction of the relocated fisherman's storage area and provide direction, and direct that the town manager and staff proceed accordingly, and that would be the bid for J.W. Dubus and Sons, Inc. for $134,500 base bid price. That's the motion.
Thank you, and a second.
Second.
Thank you very much. Mr. Metters,
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis,
Aye.
and Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Good-
Okay.
Good job, Bob.
Thank you.
Good job, Jill. Thank you. Okay, now we're on to Stepping Stones Property Housing Test Fits with the Housing and Sustainability Director, Gloria McPherson, here to present on some concepts. This is concepts now for for stepping stones. And if you just give a little background, that'd be great, Gloria, and just tee it up a little bit. Thank you.
Sure. Hold on, let me share my screen if I can. Hi, everyone. So I'm here to talk about the Stepping Stones property, which is town-owned, and some due diligence that the Community Development Department did with regard to some development possibilities for that site. So a little bit of background. About a year ago now, the Select Board directed staff to look at the possibility of using town-owned property for the development of affordable and attainable housing. The Stepping Stones property that is the subject of our discussion tonight kind of rose to the surface. If you look on the screen that I'm sharing, you can see kind of an arch through the trees. That's the rail trail, and the road to the kind of the right of it is Stepping Stones Road. And the parcel in question is bounded by Stepping Stones Road and the arc of the rail trail. It's approximately 2 acres. And about a year ago, when the board was looking into that, they asked the town manager to negotiate with the school committee, because it's part of the school parcel, to see if there was any interest in surplusing that property for the purpose of affordable and attainable housing. And the school committee voted to do so. And I think just this past summer, shortly after I started in August, the select board also voted unanimously to surplus this property for affordable and attainable housing. And after that, we thought, well, you know, there are a lot of interesting ways that you can develop any parcel. There's never one ideal development scenario. And we signed a contract with UTIL, which is an architecture and planning firm out of the Boston area, to look at the parcel and give us some conceptual ideas about how it can be developed. So this parcel in particular is interesting, and I think it really lended itself to this kind of really quick test fit scenario approach, because, as I mentioned in my staff report, there's no obvious zoning district other than municipal, which is currently zoned. So if you want to rezone it for housing, it's surrounded by R20, R40, R60 zoning. So there's no real obvious way to develop it. It's not like everything is a sea of R20 with that. So there are a lot of different possibilities. It's also very easily accessed by the sewer. There's a sewer manhole that's just a little bit further down Stepping Stones Road. Already checked in with Dr. Bob about the possibility of tying in, and he seemed to think that that was a great idea, and we could actually extend it up and capture a few additional properties. So knowing that there wasn't an obvious zoning district and that there was the availability of sewer, we met with the principal at UTIL, Tim Love, and we gave him a few parameters for looking at how we could potentially develop it. We initially said, you know, don't maximize the site because nobody wants to see, you know, houses piled on. But because it is town-owned, and we don't have those constraints of having it purchased through affordable housing trust funds, and we can put any, you know, income level housing on it, we said, you know, we wanted to see a reasonable density out there. We wanted to get a certain amount of bang for our buck, so to speak. And they came back to us with a proposal of all duplexes, which we were initially really thrilled about, because we were just like, oh, you know, great way to maximize the site. And they really sketched out what this duplex would look like. Obviously, this is a stripped-down version. It doesn't especially look like Chatham Cape Cod style, but that's what these test fits are. They're like kind of down and dirty, conceptual designs, conceptual layouts. But this is a 3-bedroom duplex, and they developed the site by using a total of 6 duplexes. So that's 12 units, 36 bedrooms. You know, it's perhaps a little bit more dense than the surrounding neighborhoods. I think that when they came back to us with this, we probably thought a little bit like, well, maybe it's more than what we wanted. The other thing that was striking about this is that there were a lot of driveways and a lot of curb cuts on Stepping Stones Road. I think that one of the issues with that was that it didn't give appropriate deference to the topography in the front, to the fact that there's mature vegetation along the street that people who drive by are used to looking at. And one of the criticisms that we gave UTL was that, well, it might be a little bit too dense. There's definitely too many driveways. We like the number of units, though. And when you look at it in this angle, it's perhaps a little bit more palatable. But the curb cuts were a huge issue, and the fact that it really wiped out all of the vegetation along the street wasn't desirable, at least at the staff level. Here's another view with private yards backing right up to the rail trail. And another perspective on that. So relatively attractive, a lot of units, a lot of bedrooms. It seemed to be appropriate for the site for families because of the school. But we actually asked them to do another look. We didn't like the curb cuts for the reasons I gave, and we suggested looking at the possibility of a loop drive so that there's a curb cut at the beginning, a curb cut at the end, get people off the street, you can maintain the vegetation in front. And we also asked them to look at a different model of development, that of smaller single-family homes rather than duplexes. And we went to the opposite extreme because obviously we can potentially mix and match. We wanted to see what the opposite end of the development scenario would look like. So they came up with a prototype for a single-family home with 3 bedrooms, 2 different roof styles for that, and also a 2-bedroom so that we'd have a mix of housing units on the site, also with 2 different roofs, just to give a little variety. And came up with this layout instead, showing the loop road, so there's only 2 curb cuts. That whole green area in the front is natural vegetation that can be retained. Far fewer units, so 10 units, 30 bedrooms. Seems to fit a little bit nicer on the site. These are the duplexes showing using the loop road. I think this rear view shows some of the limitations of the duplex model with a loop road in that they're really backed right up to the rail trail. They seem a little bit too tight. And then the single family test fit, which shows a total of 7 units, 18 bedrooms, so a combination of 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. A little bit more ease in the backyards on the lot, a little bit more distance from the rail trail, which is probably more comfortable for the people who are living there. You still maintain the vegetation in the front. And this is a perspective view. And then the one thing we asked them to do after this was, can you squeeze in one more single-family home, which they did. So this is the final version showing 8 single-family homes, 20 bedrooms. In order to accomplish that, we actually have to have an additional curb cut on the side. And the one thing that I think that this points out is if you look at the second unit from the left, that's a larger lot and there's more depth. And I think that if you do want to mix it up and put a duplex in, that's the lot that could potentially hold one. So it's possible to get even one more unit and a couple of 3-bedroom units in it that way. And those were the test fits that we got. I don't know if you want to ask any questions about them, if you want to view any of them again, if you want me to back up to any of them.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. Reaction from the board? Thank you, Gloria. Reaction from the board. Remember, this is just concepts. Mr. Nacastro, you raised your hand. And Ms.
Yeah,
Others?
thank you. Thank you, Gloria. I appreciate the presentation. I mean, the one that jumps out at me is the one at the end, because they're single families, and you've removed them from the immediacy of stepping stones. You just have, well, I would say the one at the end, possibly. You've got a 3rd curb cut in there to accommodate that additional house. I did want to ask, is this going to be subject to the same process that we had the visioning discussion on the other night on the other two parcels that the town is working on? Is the public going to weigh in on this? Because I think that's important.
This particular parcel is not included in the community engagement that we're doing for the Buckley property and the Meeting House Road property. However, one of the reasons we wanted to do these test fits was that the ultimate step in getting this use converted to housing from the school district is that it has to go before town meeting. So I think that it would be helpful potentially to show some of these concepts, just so that people understand what could potentially go on there. And if you wanted, we could probably do a community engagement process using these test fits as a starting point. But right now, it's not part of the process.
Well, when you say it has to go before a town meeting, is that because of the zoning change?
No, it has to, the surplusing of the property has to be approved
Because
by
that
town
that
meeting.
hasn't, okay, we haven't done that yet. But there would also have to be zoning change. That doesn't, that no longer will require a two-thirds vote at town meeting under the new legislation, as I think. Is that correct?
For
Ordinarily, a zoning bylaw
change?
change requires, a zoning map change requires a two-thirds vote, but I think because if it's housing related, it just no longer requires it only requires a simple
Yeah,
majority.
it is a simple majority.
I think it's good to have the test fits out there for public consideration if we're going to go to town meeting in order to surplus the property. But I do think at some point along the trail, we do have a public input forum to gauge the views of the public on these models. That's really the central point I wanted to make. See if I had anything else here before I let it go. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman, for now. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeCastro. Anybody else on the board? Mr. Metters, yep.
Sure, no, just a couple brief comments. I mean, I like to look at all the concepts. We're definitely going to keep an open mind on different options on the table, but my two thoughts are, one, the loop makes way more sense. I mean, the original curb cuts from that first slide, I understand why that jumped out at the staff, and, you know, you don't want to have all those curb cuts from a safety perspective, especially near school. You get that little loop, it makes a little neighborhood, it just starts that process much, much better. So that was very wise on the staff's part to push in that direction. The last page, last slide with the, I guess I'll call the lot with the additional curb cut. I understand we're trying to, you know, figure out what's a good balance of units. I am less thrilled with that idea only because all the other structures would be in this little bit like kind of a neighborhood, all collective in the loop, and then you got this odd, you know, lot on the side that has a separate curb cut that is part of the neighborhood, but not quite part of the neighborhood. So not as warm on that idea, just because of that disconnect, in my opinion. I don't know if it would be better just to try to look at maybe another 3-bedroom and try to make a little bit better use of something that is within the loop, you know, parameters. But my initial thought is I'm less excited about having a little separate little standalone unit that's standing by themselves and not part of what I would consider a neighborhood area that we're trying to fit into the bigger picture. So, but I think the ideas are good. I mean, we'll definitely have some of the conversations and get some feedback, but those are my initial thoughts.
I appreciate that. When they showed us this, I wondered if we could have gotten that last unit off of a common drive from the unit adjacent to it, which might address one of your concerns about making it feel more part of it, but it is still off to the side a little bit. And I wanted to comment a little bit about the zoning change for this. So everything that's proposed in all of these slides would have to be done under 40B, because even if we use the most permissive of the adjacent zoning districts, we still have more units than that. So, I mean, technically, we wouldn't have to change the zoning from municipal. It might make sense to do that, or it might not.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. Any other comments, any reactions from select board members? Mr. Shell?
Yeah, just a couple of very brief thoughts. One, I start with not only the desperation, but the size of the need. And so for me, the first question is, how do we maximize without, I'm not talking about jamming anything into a space that doesn't work or doesn't fit in the neighborhood, but I would be very interested in seeing what are all the possibilities for maximizing the use of this property consistent with that limiting consideration. And you've articulated some sort of restrictions, if you will, that were the subject of discussion with this particular advisor. I guess if things like curb cuts and so forth are going to drive this, I'd sort of like to get 2 or 3 people to be given the same parameters. How can we do that? How can we maximize the use here? I like the idea. I mean, sooner or later, we're going to have to face up to the issue of density, and this obviously presents that question. And we can probably find reasons, rationales to dodge the question this time and put it off till the next time. But I'd sort of like to push that issue as responsibly as it can be pushed here. That's pretty much what I'm thinking at the moment.
Okay, Mr. Shell, thank you. Ms. Davis?
I somewhat agree with Mike on just looking at that a little more fully. I understand the aesthetics of the neighborhood. The loop concept looks much better, obviously, than the curb cut issues. We don't need to have like a definitive plan to go to town meeting, obviously. We can maintain this conceptual idea until after, But I think it gives everybody a good idea of what's possible for the community, especially as we're engaging into the 3 different properties. We have a lot of, sounds like we have a lot going on, but this, when you boil it down, that's not a lot of units really, when you look at it. But I'm really excited to see everything move forward. So can't wait to see what comes next, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any comments? Katie, anything you want to add, please? Yep.
Thank you. Katie Donovan, Director of Community Development. I guess, just we're looking for additional direction, and I think one of the ideas is, the single family versus the duplex. Are there other housing types that you'd like us to explore for that site as we go back to UTIL for, if we're looking for a more dense option? Or is that based on single family, or again, just looking for a little bit more direction to be able to give to the consultant?
Mr. Metters?
I think from my perspective, the single-family, 2 or 3 bedroom would be a good fit for the neighborhood, and I think we can come up with enough, pieces of the puzzle to get, I don't want to use maximize, but give us the best benefit to use of the property while being respectful to the rest of the neighborhood and making it a completely balanced project, but getting the most out of it. I do think, I prefer the single-family approach, 2 or 3 bedroom structures. That's my opinion.
Yeah, Mr. Nicastro, comments?
Yeah, Katie, as I recall, in order to achieve what the 10% goal, we'd have to have 300 additional units in this town, approximately? Yeah.
At this point in time, I think that's...
If that ever happens.
Right.
It'll be generations, in my opinion, before that ever happens. But, so, I do appreciate that we have limited parcels available, and we should try to see how many units we can reasonably get in there. The appeal to me of a 3-bedroom unit versus a 2-bedroom unit is you can have a larger small family as opposed to just having 1 child, and the school is next door. We want to attract people to stay or come to town that has these families that will send their kids to school. So there's no easy answer here. I mean, we could stack as many units as we want here, but under 40B, you could put 40 units there, I guess, if you really wanted to have double-decker housing. But I don't think that's what anyone here wants to do. So Yeah, I kind of like the single-family approach myself, but I'm not hard and fixed on that. The reason being that, reason I like it is the same that Corey expressed. I think it fits into the neighborhood generally. But, you know, I don't know if that's terribly helpful to you. But I do agree with the idea of asking the consultant or consultants to see what they could do to increase the number of units within reason. Thank you.
Anything else? Yeah, just my brief comments echo many of the sentiments. I like the loop road much better than the curb cuts. That's kind of, you know, sort of obvious. I prefer single family as well, but not knowing what else could go there, or whether it's, you know, an apartment building, or, you know, if we're gonna, you know, we have a need for bedrooms and housing, so I think kind of everything ought to be on the table. It's more appropriate in that neighborhood to have single-family homes. So you wouldn't want to be outside kind of that, I don't think, in that particular neighborhood. I think you want single-family homes. And the loop road makes a lot of sense. I don't mind having that last kind of house set off. It's another house. Sharing a driveway is not a bad option there, and that last one, it kind of seems like it's apart, but if you know, maybe shared a driveway, that'd be okay. So those are my thoughts, and I think if we want to, you know, we got to get some direction. Would you like to know whether or not another firm would take a different approach, or, I mean, you know, it's really, I'm looking at these as blocks, not, you know, as housing units rather than actual styles and stuff. This is just test fits, yeah, okay. So then that's okay. So again, I would want to max it out, single family loop, and maybe give another couple of folks a shot at coming up with designs or thoughts. Okay. Anything else from the select board? Okay, thank you. That was interesting. It kind of wets your whistle a little bit and gets you thinking, does it not? Okay. Okay, now we have, I believe, we're convening the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board of Trustees. So I see Mr. Bean is here and I see Megan's here. So let's convene do a roll call and convene. Mr. Nicastro?
Present.
And Ms. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Shell?
Present.
Mr. Metters?
Present.
And the chair is present. Mr. Bean?
Present.
And Ms. Story?
Present.
Okay, come aboard. And we're going to go to an executive session. Why don't you guys come up here, or Megan, or here? Yeah, yep, chair.
Do you need a motion?
Thanks, Dallas. Thanks, Dallas. Okay. All right, to entertain a motion, Mr. Nicastro?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board of Trustees go into executive session under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21, Number 6, to consider the purchase, exchange, taking, lease, or value of real property, parenthesis, private property acquisition for affordable/attainable housing, request for proposal submission, close parenthesis, if such discussion may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the governmental body with no return to open session.
Thank you, Mr. Nicastro. Okay, we'll take a vote. Ms. Story?
Need a second.
Mr. Shell, second. Vote, Ms. Story?
Aye.
Mr. Nicastro?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Metters?
Aye.
And Mr. Bean? And the chair says aye as well. Thank you, Chatham. Good night. Merry Christmas, everybody.